Welcome to our first episode of the Success Series. I'm your host, David Berg, and I'm here with my guest, Alex Nemiroff. Alex has a pretty interesting story, some experience in the biomedical field, previous law. I'll let him explain a little bit more about what his career looked like and his path to getting there. But without further ado, Alex, the stage is yours.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. As David said, I started as a lawyer. I started a biotech company to treat a rare disease that my son suffers from, and I've been in the biotech space for 9 years now.
Awesome. And how did law come about? How did that?
You know, I think like many lawyers I hear these days, I kind of grew up without anything that I was really passionate about, or at least that I was aware of at the time, so I decided to go to law school. And after practicing for a number of years, I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I left to sort of enter the business world, and I thought that was going to be where I sat for forever. And then my son was born, suffering from this terrible disease, and immediately it kind of thrust my entire life, my family's life, my career, and everything else into a whole different place.
Wow. And jumping paths like that, I mean, they're not related, but it's not like you were a basketball player and now you're a baseball player, the Michael Jordan route, but you completely went into a different space. Was there any prior knowledge or experience or study you had in the medical field prior to pursuing that?
None. Zero.
Okay. So how you have faith that you could succeed in that field and ultimately do what you did? But
you know, I didn't. You know, when I look back and I think about, you know, how this all happened and how this was all successful, you know, I think it was like this healthy combination of fear, you know, a really strong desire, because, you know, for any parent who has a sick child, you'll do anything you can to help that child. So I think it was a combination of those two. But, you know, I learned also in retrospect that kind of just gets you only to the first step of this, which is creating the company, you know, setting out on this you know, journey to go do this thing. But then all of the challenges set in. And for me, without some sort of spiritual foundation, that would have been impossible. There's so many challenges. You know, it's kind of like I've learned in studying spirituality. It's one thing to learn the concepts. You know, that's not that hard.
Sure.
It's actually a whole different thing to start to apply them. And so, you know, that's what I really attribute all of this success to.
Would you say like spirituality gave you a whole different lens into like your own life and your own world? Is that like the benefit of like studying Kabbalah and spirituality?
Yeah, you know, I think when you start studying spirituality, at least for me, you start to learn obviously a lot about yourself, you know, and you sort of track all of your steps and the choices you made up until certain points in your life. And, you know, so when we started going down this biotech path, which of course was something, you know, we had no idea how to do, we were faced with a million challenges in just getting, you know, a drug discovered and developed, which, yeah, I mean, it's just statistically speaking, the probability of success is like sub 1%. But then on top of that, you're dealing with a very sick child and all the emotional and psychological, you know, just challenges that brings up.
Sure.
And then this is a shifting career. So it's sort of, you know, it's all of that. You're giving up everything else that you knew. Understanding about yourself, it helps. It's the first step, but without the tools to navigate, you know, through the things that come up, it's impossible. You get crushed. And I saw that very early on.
Right. And so we'll touch on spirituality later. Clearly it's a big part of your life, and I'm sure viewers would want to hear a bit about that. But just on a tangible, you know, literal perspective, a lot of our users and viewers are younger, and they're afraid of jumping into a new career, let alone completely, you know, shifting after many years. So on a you know, 1% just literal level, what was it a crazy thought that you just said, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work? Or was there like a belief internally that it's for sure going to work because you put all your desire and heart into it, and there's no other scenario that it doesn't work in the bio field?
You know, I think it's a really good question.
It's a very good question.
There was a point in time when I remember making a decision to sort of completely pivot to do this. And I remember at the time having complete certainty that this was going to work out. You know, what I've learned, the concept of certainty has been a full evolution for me. And I can tell you that, you know, I got connected to Kabbalah when I was 16 years old. I was introduced to it by a friend. I went to a Kabbalah, like an introduction to Kabbalah course, and there was something there, but I was 16.
This
So
was in New York, Miami?
this was in Miami.
Miami, okay.
My priorities were on things like girls, socializing, friends, sports, and it was not studying spirituality. But there must have been some seeds. So then fast forward to law school in Chicago, I passed the Kabbalah Center and went in and, connected and took, again, Kabbalah 1, first course, introduction course, and Kabbalah 2, something there. Again, years went by, so I moved away from it again. But I feel like there was some seed that was planted. And then when, my son was born and started down this kind of, this biotech path, I felt like the challenges were just so overwhelming, from every angle. And so I felt the need to connect to something, whether it was spirituality or some level of consciousness or therapy. There was just something drawing me. And a friend at the time said, I want to introduce you to one of the New York teachers, David Guillaume. And so he connected me to David. And David's first request of me was to listen to Kabbalah 1, 2, and 3 again, the one that he taught. And immediately it spoke to me, because these were concepts that I think were completely universal, and of course they made sense, but hearing them at different stages of my life, they had completely different meaning. At that point in time, it was exactly what I needed to hear to deal with a lot of these new complex challenges. So from that point going forward, that became the foundation. And I have zero doubt in my mind that this all would have failed miserably without, some form of spirituality, and for me, certainly that form is Kabbalah.
Right. And were you religious by nature prior to coming and studying Kabbalah, or did you grow up religious?
I did not grow up religious.
Okay.
I had religious friends, so I was around it a lot, but no.
No inherent, because I think a lot of our listeners, and there's a known misconception of Kabbalah that it's a religious belief, or that you have to be Jewish, or right? But again, I like you said, I don't think there needs to be any correlation to that. I mean, you can come from any faith, you can be an atheist for all we care, right? I mean, there's no, did you feel that when you came into it? Was that a fear? Was that what you were told prior to studying initially with David?
I probably felt that when I was younger, before I stepped foot in and heard, the first words out of, my teacher's mouth and it was just universal. Like, it had nothing to do, at least in terms of those introductory courses, it wasn't premised on you need to come from a certain background at all. And, since then, there's been plenty of people who, have been a part of my journey and my path and my experience, and they've connected to this. And no, many of them are not Jewish, let alone religious.
So, Alex, I think, we spoke a bunch about Kabbalah and your own personal life and your profession, but I think our listeners not only be inspired, but be interested in hearing a little bit more about your path in your career, specific drugs you worked on, the condition of your son, and just really anything along those lines, because clearly it was a roller coaster journey, and if you could just take us through that a bit.
Yeah, so I went to law school. I thought that was going to be my path. I sort of quickly realized that it wasn't what I wanted to do, despite being certain, that it probably was, and left practicing to go into the business world. My son was born and started having seizures within hours of birth, wow. And we looked for, we got a diagnosis, and it basically was this very sort of rare condition that no one had ever studied. And so we searched around the world for some people who knew more about it. The prognosis from his neurologist was it's going to be very poor, but we don't know that much about it. That's what I distinctly remember her saying. So to me, I thought, okay, we can probably learn a little bit about it. Maybe there's something we could do about it. So, searched around the world, found a scientist who had done some early work on this. It's a genetic mutation in a sodium channel, which is a gene in the brain that we all use, hundreds of thousands of times.
Completely random.
Completely random, spontaneous mutation. And so, so met him and talked about what could we do to better study this. So we started modeling my son's mutation in some different model systems, stem cell models, rodent models, and we started to see certain characteristics, and it opened up potentially a path to this very, new treatment approach, which is an RNA therapy. It's not exactly a gene therapy, but it's similar. Rodent models, and and we discovered a characteristic that of this mutation that sort of lended itself to potentially a new treatment approach, a new drug, because there was of course nothing for him and these other kids that we later learned.
How many kids are born with this every year?
So we don't know exactly, but we were estimating a couple thousand in the U.S. And, yeah, it's ultra rare. And
is there anything you guys could follow that could like give you guys data about who will be born with that, or it's like random?
Completely random.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we all have these spontaneous mutations. They're
Sure.
just not in significant genes, and this one is in a very critical gene in the brain. And so so the thought was, okay, maybe there's a path to develop a drug, but developing drugs require tens of millions of dollars, tremendous expertise, companies, and things like that. So I was committed to helping him, and so was this scientist, and met another parent who sort of shared this perspective, and we thought, okay, how could we move this thing forward? At first, we thought a nonprofit route would make sense because we knew nothing about drug development, but quickly realized that we needed to make this a commercially viable option, raise money, and that would be the only way we'd be able to have a seat at the table and actually, move this forward in any sort of meaningful way. So, we went out and we were at that time like talking to everyone, children's hospitals, doctors, scientists, and the consensus opinion was like, go home and take care of your sick child. You're not going to be able to really like cure this disease in his lifetime.
And just because of the quantity of children that had it, it wasn't meaningful enough to them, or what was the?
It's a very severe disease. It's a gene in the brain. The technology, drug-wise, wasn't really there yet to be able to impact this. There were so many factors against it, let alone we also had no experience. We weren't scientists, we weren't doctors. It was a lawyer, creating a biotech company. And, when you look at the probabilities of success for, these central nervous system drugs, it's like sub 1%.
Wow.
So
I can't even imagine what went through your head when you heard that. No, it was so. I can't even.
Yeah, it was very tough. In some of the meetings when, people that I had previously, put on pedestals, just by virtue of their position and their role, and telling me like, this is crazy, don't waste your time. It was crushing. It was actually right around the time that I started to get connected, to Kabbalah. So we could talk about how that really played a pivotal part. But so we nevertheless just pushed forward because there was no alternative, and so raised money. And
how much was the raise on the CDA?
The first raise was about $3.5 million.
Wow, was that family and friends, or was that?
It was family and friends. Because there were no institutional investors that were going to give us
$1.
Who's
going to throw money into a lawyer drug?
No.
Unheard of, like the case you guys were like dealing with. And,
yeah.
Right. So people were probably.
It was a tough.
Let alone you later on like the probabilities of success in biotech.
Right.
But. So, we did it. We went out and we found a pharmaceutical partner to develop the drug with us. And, and then it just started moving. And, and ultimately we got it to a point where there was actually something there. We demonstrated, proof of concept with this drug, and then sold it to a larger public biotech company to basically take it from that point forward and develop it. And, and now we all went over to work with them to really, among many other things, make sure that this drug, continues to move forward. And it's, there's been, an incredible number of challenges, as there's with any drug, let alone, a therapy like this, in a condition like this. But we recently got cleared by the FDA to start treating patients.
It's huge.
It was huge, and so we dosed 5 patients in this first trial, and we just last week read out the preliminary results of the study, and the drug is having an incredible sort of efficacious response, which is unbelievable.
Wow. What were the hopes of this trial? What results we're hoping to be seeing?
Yeah, so in typical drug development, the first study is done in healthy volunteers. given the disease, given the disease indication here, the severity of the disease, and the type of treatment, which is an RNA therapy. It's an injection of a large molecule into the spine. This was not going to be given into healthy volunteers. This is called a first-in-patient study.
Sure.
So the goal of this first study was just safety. The idea was basically, can we just sort of validate that this drug is safe and that we're not really seeing these concerning adverse. Exactly. So that was the goal. So it's a low dose. The hope, and we talk about hope's not a strategy, but I can tell you the hope was maybe we would see a signal of some sort at this low dose. Maybe we'd see, because seizures are the sort of most easily measurable endpoint here. Maybe 10, 15% reduction in seizures at this very low dose across.
It's huge, 15%.
It is on top of standard care. What we actually saw was 45% median seizure reduction at this dose on top of what is the best available treatment out there for all of these kids. A large percentage of die, and we don't really know any kids over the age of 20 with this disease. It's that serious. So yeah.
So in going about this treatment, you mentioned being bought out by a larger pharmaceutical company. Given the rarity of it and the quantity of children who experience this, why would a company of that stature and size be inclined to buy you guys out?
Yeah, so basically we partnered with them on a deal that allowed us a profit share on the outcomes and some milestones. In this day and age, thanks to a number of things, there is incentive for developing drugs for ultra rare diseases. I think economically, I always knew that we had to make a commercially viable case for this. If we couldn't do it, we would never get anywhere. And fortunately, as the diagnostics have gotten better, more kids have been getting diagnosed. It's still ultra rare, but it's enough to make it commercially viable. And so, there's a lot of also incentives for orphan drug development. And so, between that and ultimately, wanting to successfully develop a drug, which is very rare for, biotech companies to get a drug approved, I think, those three things made it something that, we were able to partner. And what's crazy is that at the time that, we had demonstrated proof of concept, which essentially means that, the drug conceptually works, there were a number of companies that actually wanted to partner this drug, which was incredible.
And I'm assuming some bigger names.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And so the process of going around proof of concept from the initial inception of the drug, how much time in trials did that take?
So that took about 5 years, 4 years, 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
With constant failures throughout the process, I'm assuming.
Constant failures. There were a number of times when this thing was as sure as dead, and and you talk about so there's the professional challenges, but then there's the personal and the emotional, and there's a community of kids who desperately need this drug. So there's a lot of that, let alone even individually speaking, when I start to apply my own sort of perceptions of failure, success, all of these things that I think all of us experience. It's tough.
And so, of course, your internal motivation was largely driven by your son.
Yeah.
But I think, clearly, case in point, 4 or 5 years without any real success until now. What was your driving force that this has to work, and if it doesn't work, I'm gonna try until it does? Because I think anybody trying to be an entrepreneur is, of course, going to go through failures, but I don't think most understand how many failures, right? You're like, sure, I'll struggle a bit here and I'll have to fire a couple people, but to the extent that you had to go through 45 years without any results, how did you wake up the next day and say, I'm going to go at this again until it works?
It's interesting because I think we've all heard this idea of like you said, pushing through failures. It's not how many times you fail, it's how many times you get up, all of these sort of cliches.
Sure.
I even remember, in studying this concept of certainty, when I was a little bit younger, I had this complete misperception of what certainty was. I remember being in college, and there was a girl who I was really into, and I didn't know if she, sort of she felt the same way. And I remember studying the 72 names like with certainty, and like I thought like that was gonna,
Really?
yeah.
And so you were already privy to Kabbalah when you were.
I don't even,
Yeah.
I wasn't, but like I guess there were like relics of it that stayed with me, and that's why I feel like there was something about this wisdom that just touched me when I was younger that just stuck, because I remember that, but I don't remember being connected in other
Wow.
ways. But I learned, of course, that that's not what certainty is. It's kind of trust that like whatever is happening ultimately is what is supposed to happen. It's for all of our highest good.
Right.
And I feel like this is the case for so many people, including myself. We get all these concepts, get all these cliches about failure and success, and persevering and grit and things like that. When you're actually tested, it really shows. Is this a concept, or do you actually really believe this to your core? And that's where I am certain, without some spiritual underpinning, it would have just collapsed on top of me. There's no question. So, I think it's a combination of, the desire has to be so strong, whether it's an entrepreneur, for me, for my son.
Right.
So that was there. The concepts and the tools have to be there, without question. That was there. And then it's just the ability to actually stand there when the world's crashing down, and be able to, kind of apply it all. And,
Right.
And,
The great point you mentioned, which was the last one, in that when the whole world seemingly is against you and nobody has faith in whether it's your product, in your instance, the drug that you were looking to develop, there must be a line where some things are meant to fail, right? Like you mentioned, for greater good, and other things are meant to be pushed through and break that wall, and eventually you'll see success. So how can you differentiate as a young entrepreneur between I should push through no matter what, and then like, no, it's a bad idea, buddy, like get on to the next one, right? So when can you identify that?
It's a great question. I can say for me, there's two pieces to this. This concept of, is this just about me, or is there something greater here, was really important, because, for me, developing a drug for my son, it's very easy to use him as motivation, and to just sort of push through this because the alternative is just terrible. But at some point I did realize that was actually a very selfish motive. And it was when things were very challenging. And I did realize that if I didn't have this sort of broader perspective on how this could actually help not just him, but all these other kids, and keep that as top of mind as helping him, once I started to do that, it actually made things a lot easier, because you realize you're not just doing this for yourself.
It's that sharing concept, right? Not taking, but sharing. That's where it comes, right?
Yeah. So I think that's key. I think for an entrepreneur in developing, I do think, at the end of the day, you need to, really just sort of see that you can help all these people. It's not just about you and your own success and your own, people's approval and these other things. I think there's certainly that element. So I think focusing on how you can change the world, if you really believe that, becomes, in a sense, a way of sharing as opposed to, taking. I think I used to think also, like, at the end of the day, I could, maybe do something and maybe it'll impact, some small circle, but, realistically, like, no,
Right.
I'm not going to be able to change the world per se. What I've seen is that I think everybody does get an opportunity to do it. And the question is, like, when that comes, how prepared are you? And I don't mean, how intellectually prepared are you, but I do really actually strongly believe it's sort of how prepared are you from the standpoint of, of kind of consciousness and mindset. And no one knows when that's going to come. Like I said, I had no idea this was going to come this way.
Sure.
Never could have predicted this. So I think, I also think that you draw those opportunities by the work we do on transforming ourselves, because I think what keeps those things from coming to us is all of these, limited beliefs about ourselves. Our things like, for me, it was a need for approval and this external validation, how much that ran my life. So I don't know the opportunity would have ever come if not for working on that stuff and then being in a position to draw it and then to act on it.
Ironic, because at the time you were seeking approval, which was negative. It was your self-worth. And now you just got approval for something which is actually very positive. So I think that's the paradox of life, right? It's the things that can harm us. If we can flip our perspective of that and use it for our good, it actually becomes the greatest thing and actually manifest success in our own lives.
Totally.
And so I think to wrap up, and to go on that note, I think ego is something that's extremely prevalent, as you touched, in anybody, but mainly in 20 to 30-year-olds when you're starting to figure out your life, your pride, your sense of worth, it's everything rides on your ego. And so I think what would be interesting to see is how can you use your ego as something that benefits you as opposed to, caring too much what people think about you, and something that actually rids your success as opposed to manifest it.
Are you saying the ego is actually a good thing? Like you could use it to be successful? Wow.
It sounds like those are the tools that Alex
Ultimately used, right? I mean, if you didn't have ego, what is ego? But if you didn't have ego, I mean, why would you push for 5 years to see if this? I mean, there had to be, right?
Yeah, I think that I think that it drives you, and I think that it sort of it allows you to push through, some of this stuff early on, and for whether it's an entrepreneur, in my situation, it pushes you to a point, but it's certainly not enough. It sort of gets the ball rolling. It allows you to push past things, even if you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I look back, early on, even with my son, and part of me actually didn't want to face the reality of the situation at the time. So I think my gut, or what maybe people say is a defense mechanism, is like, I'm going to fix it.
Right.
Only years later did I realize that, through studying some of the stuff that we study here, that was actually, I was looking to avoid, and that's what I was looking to do back then.
Right.
But it got me to the point where then, when it's, we really sort of stepped into like, the major league of how to do this, I could be in a position to transform that and actually grow. Because like I said, this never would have been successful to the point it is now without all this other wisdom that I've been able to learn. I would have gotten to point, from A to point B,
right,
but certainly not to point,
C, D, and forever.
Exactly. And I think that's the difference. And from what I see in people, there's plenty of successful people without spirituality, without consciousness.
Right. You can look at all over the world.
Totally.
And not good people either, right? People that are not doing good and
yes,
really nasty people, they still make a ton of money. So I don't think the two.
100%. But if you're looking for, as cliche as it sounds, fulfillment, the ability to enjoy the things you have, all of that stuff, I've yet to see it really happen without spirituality, consciousness, which for me is Kabbalah.
Beautiful.
Can you recall one experience that you had, if it was in the past year, month, maybe 5-10 years, that was like a whoa moment? That was like, it could be Kabbalah related, it could be spiritual related, it could be anything related, but you were talking a lot about experiencing and feeling. Anything comes to mind like that? That was like a whoa moment,
Interesting.
Maybe reading, so I don't know, something came, I don't know, whatever it could be.
There's plenty, but there's two that just come to mind right now. One of them involves your dad. Your dad, Michael Burke, who's the head of the Kabbalah Center today, and so my son was suffering. His disease is brutal. It's an ultra rare disease. It essentially the disease manifests as seizures, and there's just a ton of terrible symptoms. And I was beside myself. I sort of turned to all of the tools that I had, and nothing was breaking. And the drug that we were developing was really stuck. And I was in New York, and I went to see Michael, and I came into his house, and I was sort of pouring everything out.
Sure.
It was very emotional. I was telling him, all this going on. And I wanted his advice. What should I do now? And he said, I just want you to have some peace of mind around what's going on. And I left, and I was like, what was he even talking about? I'm
I want some specific advice.
I spoke to a friend of mine, and I was like, I don't even know what that means. I wanted more guidance and advice. I'm not sure. Over a little bit of time, I've come to realize exactly what it meant, and it was very profound for me, and it definitely changed things. What I learned, that at least what I believe he was saying, was that not having peace of mind with the current situation in many ways was a form of doubt in this entire system, in the light and everything else. And I see this so much with, anytime that something comes up that I don't like, that, that just doesn't work for me, that I want to change, there's so much resistance. I think when I started this stuff to help my son and all these other kids, I wanted to just fix. It was like fix. But this focus on changing the outcome, takes you out of the present moment and really, undermines this concept of certainty and trust and surrender. And what I saw was that it was actually stopping, the momentum of this program. It was stopping the change from happening. It was stopping the drug from getting developed. When I
So
non-peace of mind, right?
Yeah.
your willingness to help and trying was actually not necessarily doing the effect that you wanted to see from it, right? It was
yes, it was
counteracting that in a sense.
It was that I needed to do all of those things, but with this complete acceptance and trust and certainty, as we like to say, in exactly what was in front of me today.
Peace of mind.
Yes.
And the second I did that, everything started moving.
Wow.
So that was like really impactful.
And you said previously that your life is a lot happier, you have more joy through Kabbalah, but the challenges are still there. I mean, that sounds completely illogical, right? Doesn't happiness come from the removal of challenges? How is life better when things are the same? That's the definition of insanity, right? So how do you express that? How does that make any sense from your experience?
Yeah, watching, going through this, and especially like from the vantage point of seeing a lot of other, in my case, these other families who are dealing with very challenging things, you realize that no one has a life free of challenges. No one has a life free of stress. It's just, it's a complete illusion to think that that's the end goal. So the happiness comes from, your ability to experience those in a different way. That one of my favorite quotes, which I learned from, one of the early Kabbalah teachers that I had here, was, the universe doesn't give you what you want, it gives you who you are in that moment. And, what I loved about it is that really, it's like a cause and effect issue. Like if we want to change something, the only place we can go to change that first is internally within ourselves and to transform. And, that I think is the essence of so many of these teachings, because like you said, the challenges will always be there. So when you want to make changes to your experience of them, it's only internal.
Sure. And you test your happiness to, it sounds more of a state of mind than a physical reality. I think an issue or a desire in many 20 and 30-year-olds in today's day and age is that physical manifestation of things, be it cars, money, relationships, is what's going to lead to your happiness. In your instance, it doesn't sound like any of that was what led to your happiness. Before Kabbalah, were those things that you pursued and ultimately led to a dead end, or did they satisfy you to an extent? What was your experience like prior to Kabbalah with happiness and your pursuit of it?
Totally sought out those things, totally, validated my own self and my own happiness and my own success through those things. And, at that age, like I don't think that's unreasonable or that's just unexpected. I think that that's just the reality of kind of the way, even society is set up, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that the difference, and in retrospect, where this wisdom would have been so powerful for me,
Sure,
is to experience all of those things in a very different way. It's similar to how we look at challenges. All these material things can also be great. It's just the way in which we, derive value from them about ourselves, and jealousy of others, and like that's where they become very dangerous. And I feel like that's the difference. But yes, I was totally in that world. It didn't lead me to any happiness. It didn't lead me to fulfillment. But I suppose that's just what people value.
right. So do you think, given you've studied Kabbalah now, how would, right, you can have a Ferrari at 21 years old and feel completely gutted and empty, maybe worse than you did before you made the money and bought the Ferrari.
Ferrari? Really? That won't make you happy? It's crazy. It's true though, right? It's crazy, but it's true.
Yeah. And I think that, that's something that I think we should really touch on, because I think that if you told somebody that's in their 19 or 20 or 25 years old that those things won't make them happy, then the immediate thought would probably be that nothing will make me happy, because that's what the world is telling me I need to be happy, and I'm not happy now.
Yes.
Then what can I pursue? So I guess the question would be for you is, without those things existing, what can you derive happiness from, or how do you derive happiness from those things? Is it a consciousness? Is that what you're expressing? Is it merely a viewpoint that you have on those things that changes your experience of it?
I think that's right. For me, I've only been able to really enjoy things, material things, after transforming myself and, my limited beliefs around the value of those things. Because, for me, my entire life, it's been about seeking approval, external validation. So it was very easy to sort of find value in those things and think I was successful because I had those things. Then I went through this period of, like I think many of us do, after our 20s and 30s, when we're like, oh, these things are not going to bring me happiness. What's interesting is on the back end of that, when you sort of work through and transform yourself, you actually can enjoy those things, but you're not putting so much value in them. And I think that's the difference now, because, myself and many other people, enjoy material things in a different way these days.
Right? I mean,
yes. I think that's a misperception about Kabbalah too. I think that, about spirituality in general, I think, there's the Buddhist perception of,
let's restrict
Yes.
or refrain from all the pleasures of life, and which is completely irrational. Life's meant to be experienced through pleasure, but I think what you're saying is that the restriction of the caring what others think and of the self-worth being dependent on those monetary things is what prevents the happiness from coming in.
Completely.
Right.
Totally. And I think, for many of us when we're 20 or 30, like, you just think that will bring you happiness. These things will bring you happiness.
You have the nice girl, you have
Yes.
I mean, what more can you ask for?
Totally.
Right?
And for a period of time, I think it does. I just think it's fleeting, like any instant gratification is. It's just fleeting. So then the question is, after that, what's left?
What comes next?
Yeah.
Right. And so to continue on that thought, I think that, many, I don't even want to say 20s, I'm 25 years old, but I think that everybody cares what people think about them, and that tends to be the biggest hindrance of happiness, fulfillment, and really overall experience of life is diminished when that's where you're staying, right? You wake up in the morning, and most of our decisions are unfortunately influenced by what others will think of us. So it sounds like you're at a place where maybe you still care, but it's not overarching all your desires. You're still doing what's inherent to you. I don't think you would have jumped from law into a field that you had no experience in if you cared a lot what people thought about you. So clearly you're gifted in that sense. But is that something that over time, as you get older, naturally you care less and less what others think? Or is that something that you have to actively and proactively do in order to get to a state where it's not as important to you?
I think from the people I know who do not study spirituality, study some form of consciousness, even therapy, I think that plagues you your entire life. I think for the rest of us that do, it's still there. I think that, one of the real benefits of being connected to some, universal spiritual wisdom or consciousness is that you see it, you catch it quickly, and you're able to actually work on transforming it. And the most fulfillment that I've gotten, as crazy as it would have sounded to me when I was 20 or 30, is through transforming those things, because it gives you complete freedom to actually just be, exactly who you are, do exactly what you want. And I mean, that is so incredibly powerful. It allows people to do things that they otherwise, shouldn't be able to do. Maybe one example for me is being able to, start a successful biotech company and develop a drug, for a ultra rare disease. Like, that's just, that was my experience.
Unheard of. Yeah. How many people are doing that, right?
And Alex, I would love to know, you're talking a lot about right now, just the whole idea of doing what you feel and doing what's right for you. Is there maybe one practical thing that you do day by day that helps you to do that? Or maybe, do you know anything, maybe all the youth that's watching, teenagers, the young adults, what could today the youth do practically day by day to stop caring what others think and focus more on what they think, what they care about? Is there anything that comes to mind?
It's a very hard question. If I truly knew how to exist without caring what people think, I guess what I would say is, one of the earliest concepts that we learn in this wisdom, is, are you kind of in layman's terms, are you a taker or are you a giver? And I can tell you that I'm constantly asking myself that question, because I think what I've learned and what I believe now with certainty to be true is that you only can drive happiness when you're a giver. Whenever I'm going to go into a meeting, or whether it's work or whether it's personal, an example happened recently where I had an important work meeting and I was preparing for it, and a friend called me with something that I really did not want to deal with because I needed to prepare. And in that moment, I knew I had an opportunity right there to be a giver or to be, a taker, and just basically just say, I need to prepare for this meeting. No. And I decided to take the call and to give and to share. And I realized from studying something like this, and I would have never in a million years appreciated this concept, that putting myself in sort of that channel of being a giver will actually prepare me a million times more for the meeting. That's just one concept that I use all the time now. Where are there opportunities to give? Another example is a friend's 35th birthday party that I had to go to with, just coming down from New York. A number of his friends from New York came down. It's a kid I went to college with.
We'll leave his name out because he might be listening to this, so
Right.
we won't call him out. But
So I had to go to this party, and I did not want to go. I actually didn't like any of these kids that were coming down for it, and I really didn't want to go. And I was driving there, and I just felt like I don't want to be here. So I called my teacher, David Gim, and I said, I don't want to go to this thing, like, at all. He's like, you are in the perfect consciousness to go into this because you're not looking to receive anything.
even though you had zero desire to go, he was telling you.
Zero.
Right.
He said this is the optimal consciousness to be in.
Why?
Yeah, why is that?
You're not looking to take.
What's wrong with taking?
I don't think there's anything wrong with taking. I guess what I've learned here is that if you are solely focused on taking, you'll generally get these sort of instant moments of happiness, but it doesn't last. And again, these are concepts that, maybe when I was younger I would have doubted. Over time now, looking back, it's the only reason for, my personal happiness and success. So of course I went into this party, and I mean, the conversations and actually business opportunities that came out of it would have never come out of it in a million years had I not been in that consciousness, that state of mind.
For somebody who's never tried that or hasn't experienced that, how would you even suggest that they go about something that sounds so irrational and illogical?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of sort of a mindset, a consciousness of giving. How can I give? Sometimes I think sometimes giving is obvious, like giving actual things. Sometimes
Sure.
It's giving time. The way I was taught this concept here was that it's really just operating counter to your comfort zone. So if your comfort zone is to, not want to do something, it's kind of to push through and do it, especially when it's, to benefit somebody else. I've tried to apply that as much as I can, and the best things that I have in my life outside of my family are all from experiences where I'm pushing through what's otherwise comfortable for me. So effectively, giving.
Interesting. That's something that's so foreign, especially in today's day and age. There's wellness apps, there's apps, calm apps, there's breath work, and all of those things ultimately lead you to a place of comfort. That's the ultimate desire. If there's not a spiritual component to it, it's how can I live the most comfortable and satisfying life? So how does one pursue discomfort, which ultimately you're saying that's what leads to comfort, and the pursuit of comfort will actually make you very uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think if we talk about kind of, I don't know whether it's the sort of biomedical scientific space, like maybe the cold plunge is a good example.
Okay.
Do you cold plunge, by the way?
I have a couple of times, but it's like the first few minutes are terrible and you feel awful. It doesn't feel right. Why would anybody?
5 seconds, right? Getting in.
Who would ever choose to do this?
It's like self-pain, right?
Yes. Once you get through on the back end, and then the health benefits are incredible. I think it's like working out, which, you would know better than me. It's like this idea of breaking down muscle. It's counterintuitive. You're going to break it down to build it back up more strongly. So I think there's a big element of that. I think this is not in any sort of stretch a path to be unhappy and to be miserable, and therefore you're going to get, all these sort of successes at some later point.
Sure.
It's not that. It is in the moment happiness. It's sort of just a shift in consciousness and mindset to a little bit more of a sharing, giving to receive happiness versus I'm going to take and that's going to fulfill me.
Sure. So I think that also can tie back into with the fear of religion, which most religions say live a life of restriction, suppression, do these things that you don't want to do for your entire life, and hopefully when you go up there, there's something waiting for you, right? In every religion, that's the same ideology. So I think what you're saying is crucial, because a spiritual path for you, which is Kabbalah, is one where you experience instant, prolonged gratification, although that seems contradictory to what religion and even ultimately spirituality teaches you, right? You can be happy today, you can be happy throughout your life, and then also if you do believe in an afterlife, there's an experience there too, but it's not predicated on your actions in this lifetime, right?
Totally. The one of the most eye-opening things for me in studying, this wisdom versus some of the others that I had just, barely touched, is that, this is a path to day in, day out happiness, with everything else that's going on. And I saw like even, getting exposed to this earlier on in my life when my priorities were very different, and they were more into material things and socializing, things like that.
Sure.
The foundation of this and the mindset and the consciousness that it provided me just created so much more happiness. So it's not suggesting we take away all of these things.
Right.
It's like, keep your life exactly as it is, but shift your consciousness, and you'll be able to achieve a whole nother level of happiness and fulfillment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think so on a different topic, and again, although we'll have many different listeners, a large proportion will be of younger adults and individuals looking to figure out their life's path. And unfortunately, I'm sure as you've seen in your profession, majority now are experiencing anxiety, depression, mental health issues, lack of attention, lack of focus, lack of purpose. And so I guess first, why do you think as time goes on and we're more technologically advanced and there's more innovations in the world, it's actually doing the inverse effect of what right? We have an iPhone, which is meant to connect us with others. All these social media platforms are meant to connect us with others, but it seems to be doing the opposite. People are more alone. People feel more lonely, depressed, as I mentioned. So why do you think that is? And then do you believe that technology is not the answer? I mean, clearly what you've done is using technology, and I mean, it's two different questions, but how do you think the two intertwine, and is there a path to where technology works to our favor and not against us?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of technology. I think, any innovation is just incredible. And I think that, one of the most amazing things for me about consciousness, again, it sort of speaks to this idea of, it's just the way in which you engage with things. And I think that the lack of consciousness, the lack of spirituality, the lack of that when you magnify it, when you sort of put that on top of the magnified way in which people are engaging today, it's just going to, expose more of the challenges if you're not doing it from a place of consciousness. Because I know plenty of people who are coming at this very differently who are not feeling a lot of those things. And it's complicated because I think everyone's situation is different, but sure. I do think the sort of universal nature of what, Kabbalah brings really just brings light to any situation. So I don't see why it would be any different here.
Alex, well, thank you so much for your time. We do have a couple questions from the audience, and so we'll take them and we'll wrap up with that.
Our first question is from a very close friend and student from Florida, and he asks, why Kabbalah? We've heard from everything you've shared today that Kabbalah gave you a very big view and experience that is more fulfilling in life. Why Kabbalah? Why is that the answer?
So, I can only speak for me, and I'll say that, any form of consciousness, spirituality, in my opinion, is essential. I can't imagine my life without it, and certainly none of my success would have happened without it. For me, Kabbalah, as distinct from other forms of spirituality and consciousness that I have, explored over the years, is that it fits in perfectly to my life as it is. Certainly when I first got introduced, I wasn't ready to give up a lot of the things that gave me pleasure at the time, the lifestyle, the desires, and what Kabbalah offered was not, in any way inconsistent with any of that. It just enhanced it, and that's continued to be true to this day. Everything in my life doesn't necessarily from the outside look all that different. It's just my enjoyment and experience of it is on a whole nother level.
So our second question is from a very close student. He's 15 from Israel. The question is, how can today, this week or this month, what's one thing we can do to live a more fulfilling life?
It's a really good question. There's plenty, but I guess I would say this all comes back to one thing for me and what I've seen in my entire life, and it's been the exact same idea. The second you start to look externally to change things in your life, they'll never change. They may change for a moment, but they'll never actually change. And so for me, whenever something isn't going right externally in my life, whether it's in business, career, drug development, at home, I always pause and ask myself, what am I doing internally? What's going on for me internally? And how can I work on changing that and transforming that? Because for so many years, I was constantly looking to change my circumstances, my path, anything outside of myself. And now it's just so clear to me that that never brought me any real, true, and lasting change. And so it's really just as simple as that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure with Alex. If you want to see more of him, I know he's going to be on a podcast in the coming weeks. You can check him out on
Rarecast. It's a podcast from the biopharma industry on rare disease and kind of inspiring stories about developing drugs for rare disease.
Beautiful.
Check it out.
Beautiful. And next week, our guest will be a serial entrepreneur from London. Some of you may know him. I'm going to leave his name out, but come join us, and we look forward to chatting. Thanks, guys.
See you next time.